YouTube, Awesome Rider here. Welcome to my review for Kamen Rider Gavv episode 5, and this was a great episode. Not that last week's wasn't, but I enjoyed this episode even more. It did lay down even more mythology and explanations, but more clarifications on stuff that I felt like we didn't already know, or expansions on it at least, and I sound like a bit of a broken record with this, but I cannot overstate how much I adore the pacing of this series. Not just compared to Gotchard. Obviously, I've been making a lot of Gotchard comparisons, and unfortunately I don't see that ending soon, just because it is so directly comparable to my different experiences. But just compared to Modern Rider period, usually we run the gauntlet on the ability forms, we get the status quo set up so quickly, and I love that we're actually taking our time where it feels like the ability forms are paced together well, and you can actually get to form an attachment to them or like them or feel like they're not, well, forgettable like the Gotchard ones or any of the other ones where they just debut episode after episode, and even just how they're taking their time setting up the character dynamics, you know, establishing the relationship between characters and the settings. I like that we took time to have Shoma doing that little kind of walkabout. I wouldn't have even minded if they had let that last a few more episodes, but I'm also glad we have him back with Sachika, and presumably Honto will be joining again soon, just because it will be nice to have those characters interact. As much as I like the pacing of that, I am looking forward to seeing what that dynamic is like and having a bit of that classic feel. I don't want it to be like Dawn Brothers where they don't meet until the very end of the series. So I'm really just so happy with the pacing of it. It just makes me so much more invested. And again, not just pleasantly surprised compared to Gotchard, but Modern Rider period. And I also really like the more fleshed out mythology we got here about Gavv, because we know that his Gavv is different because he's half human period, but then they also talked about how there was experimentation on him, and he meets what I think was his uncle. He said he was confused by who he was. I don't know if that, because he said uncle twice, or he said like your father's brother, he said brother 3 times. I might have misunderstood the translation. Maybe he's his great uncle, but I think it's just meant to be his uncle. Either way, in my head, he's right now his uncle. Anyway, long story short, or short story very long, we find out that that person that saved him at the end of last week's episode, who's been living on Earth, was not only the person that created the system to turn humans into candy for the villains, but created the Gavv system. And I like the way this is explained. Like, I like that Gavv's not just a chosen one because he was born half human, like, and has Gohan powers where he's super powerful. I like that it just made him different, but they had to enhance him. It very much gives me Kiva vibes in a different way, because in Kiva, you know, the main form existed because he couldn't handle the full power of the Fangire armor since he was only half Fangire. So I like that we have that kind of version here where he had to be modified. And so it gives a reason why the powers look different, both because it's kind of a technical modification, and also because he's half human. That's kind of a reason they take on kind of a midway point between humanoid and monstrous. I think that's just really cool, and just the overall explanation of it, again, kind of coming back to something I said a few weeks ago with why his powers take on the forms of food he eats on Earth. It takes this absolutely crazy, silly thing and actually gives it legitimacy, which I think is just really cool. Like, this whole mythology and story hits that Toku sweet spot of, like, you're watching someone fighting in a potato costume and it looks awesome, but also the storyline actually makes sense with the mythology, and it's this weird mix of very strange, but it's also engaging enough that I can take it seriously. Not like in a, it should be on HBO way, but I think you know what I mean. A series like this could very much be more of a parody-leaning series that's just meant to be for laughs, but the fact that I'm actually legitimately interested in the mythology and think it's badass and interesting the way he turns into the forms is really cool. It also gives a lot of interesting depth to his family relationship, where we find out, at least it seems, that his father basically, it was almost like a Star-Lord's dad situation where he came to Earth and he fell in love with this woman, but it was more like he kidnapped her, like, oh, she's pretty, I'm gonna take her, and then kept him locked away with his mother in the castle. I'll be interested to see whether there's some revelations there about maybe some more complexities. As it is, that's actually pretty dark if you think about all the implications of it. But I'll be curious if there's more complexity to it. Like, maybe there was a connection between his mother and the father at some point, or the reasoning why his father wanted to modify him so he could produce the little gorgonzola cheese, whatever those are called. Like, it could just be like the classic, like, oh, my son's a disappointment, you must have the powers that we all have, you must be modified, son. Or it could be something different, where maybe it's kind of like an Oliver Queen's dad situation where he set this whole production up of this new system, and then he maybe had some regrets. Maybe, like, the love for the mother gave him some humanity or something, and he knew dark things were coming and he wanted to prepare his son. I don't know. I hope it's a little bit more complex, but it definitely left some fascinating questions. And we also learned more about the way that the villains work, which I don't know why I didn't think about this, because I was just thinking about it so much as just the villain team. I wasn't thinking about about their race like as a whole, like this kind of framed it more interesting for me, where like it's not like these people are the rulers of the whole race and the whole race is evil. Like it's just a separate race of people whose like bodies and systems work this way, where they produce these little things, and they found a way to, you know, turn humans into food, which gives them more power. And so it's actually really interesting because it's not just the villains imposing their evil on humans, but also imposing evil on their own society, and also the fact that their own society isn't totally evil is actually refreshing, because usually it's just a race of evil aliens or monsters or whatever, and the fact that it's actually just a subset of that race that's evil was interesting. I'll also be really curious, and this is something that I meant to mention last week, if we're going to have some redemption arcs for any of his family, because as we know, usually in Rider and Sentai, like 90% of the human villains will get some sort of redemption arc, and that always bothers me a little bit, but I feel like there's an extra chance here because they're his family. If they do that, I hope it's only some of them. I find that to be more interesting in general, that we would have some that stay evil, but I think it's more interesting when you have some siblings that maybe will turn and be on, almost on Gotchard's side, on Gav's side, and then some that don't. But I'll be really interested to see that. But overall, it's just set up a really interesting mythology, both in terms of the way he works and everything the villains are doing, and I'm curious to find out more, and it's set up a pretty traumatic backstory for Shoma, and I also like that it furthered more of his different motivations of wanting to like find the happiness that was stolen from him and protect the humans from his family's plans. And I feel like each week we get different layers to his motivations. Like I like that it's not just one thing. Like they're all kind of interrelated, but I feel over the course of 5 episodes there's like multiple layers to his motivations as a character and as a Kamen Rider compared to just Kemis! So I really like that a lot. And I also really like that scene where we have, you know, him saving the humans that Honto was trying to save as an investigation, and they're all like, no, it's a monster, and he's like, no, it's me, I'm Elizabeth, I'm Sue. I like that Honto was the one to defend him and show the public, or start to show the public, that he's a Kamen Rider and that he's defending them. Mainly because when we first found out that his mother's death or disappearance or whatever was connected to the granite, I was really worried it was going to be one of those situations where he flies off the handle when he sees Gavv and either assumes that he was somehow the guy, or because he's related, he just has an irrational hatred. Like, you know what I'm talking about in Toku, where you'll have that where the character just completely loses all common sense and flies off the handle. And that can be interesting, you know, in some ways, but I'm glad that they didn't go that route here, and that it makes Valen / Honto not seem like an irrational Toku idiot. And I thought that was actually kind of interesting and kind of a change of pace. There's also, just on the superficial stuff, we didn't debut a new form, but we did get the new, like, Flamin' Hot potato chips, Gachinizo, Gorgonzola cheese or whatever again. And it just gives him like flame abilities, which I was kind of surprised that it didn't alter anything. Like honestly, I thought it was going to alter the swords. I thought he was going to have red swords or something. But I'll be honest, you know, as much as I get sick of like the over merchandising aspect, just as a fun little bit, I wouldn't have minded if the potato chip form had just different shaded forms, you know, for different flavors of potato chips, like Flamin' Hot, sour cream and onion, cheddar. I think that would be kind of funny, kind of like the way Geo's decayed form worked, or even Jimba Gaim, where it's just plating. Like, I didn't need that, but I thought that'd be kind of fun just in the context of the series. But regardless, I think the way they're doing this is a good way of pacing it, where this week you show off this little guy that gives him the flaming powers. In between the other forms you had showing off like the giant arm. That's a cool way of like being like, hey kids, there's more to collect this week if you go to Toys R Us, but also it lets the forms breathe, which I think is really nice. And the fights continue to be a lot of fun. Next week we are getting Valen. I'm really happy with the pacing of it. I'll be interested to see how the episode shakes out next week, just because if I had one nitpick about the pacing, is I wish there was a little more build up to Valen's possible motivation of being a writer. Obviously he's entrenched in the world, and he, you know, had his whole backstory with his mother, so it's not like it comes out of nowhere, but I feel we've done good build-up, like with that guy clearly making the Rider system over the last 2.5 episodes, and Valen being involved in the world, but I wanted to get a little bit more of his point of view as to maybe why he would become a writer. Kind of like how, like I said, over 5 episodes, we've gotten a lot of motivation and build-up as to Shoma's motivation. That could all be solved next week. Like, next week could pace it perfectly where I understand why he wants to become a writer, but I just feel everything else has been so well done that it feels like that part is a little bit undercooked, but that could be solved next week. But overall, I'm just so pleasantly surprised to be enjoying this series so much. Let me know what you guys think of the episode in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for all my videos. Dawson Rider, signing out.